no power in the verse can stop me. So, in my going through the works of Joss Whedon that I like, I have now arrived at Firefly, and yeah, that I have done not like as a full proper cosplay because I didn't have the hair correctly, but I have done it as a cosplay. This has the patches. I got the bear. So yeah, I do enjoy Firefly quite a bit. So I'm actually gonna do something that I said I wasn't going to do again unless, like, the last time I did it got something like 50,000 views or whatever, which it's getting closer to than I thought it would. So, gulp. But in any case, this is only a handful of episodes in one movie. So, we're going to start off with that thing that I did for Doctor Who, which is every episode in 10 words or less. Now, these themselves will not suffice so much as reviews. They are just 10 words to give sort of a little bit of something about the episode. Maybe it's my feeling about it. Maybe it's just a joke I think is funny that actually is not representative of my feelings at all. So we're going to do that first because it's quick and it's fun in this case. And then once we got that done, I will actually rank every episode of the show with the film Serenity worked into the ranking as well. So that's enough preamble. Let's get into this.
Meet your new surrogate family. It's the first episode again, but faster. Enjoy the Reaver buildup. They won't be this scary again. We sure this isn't a hootenanny? We took space out of Space Western, and we're sorry. Dang, she's good. Never meet your heroes. They might be Jane. Only 60% in, and you will fear the hero dying. Bet most of this will pay off next season. Oh wait. Past episode actions have consequences and they hurt. Dang, she's not as good as the first time. Feels we're always gonna hit. This episode just carried them. You thought the Malin in our relationship was problematic before. Meet the rough draft of the operative. Thought Anya's death in Buffy was unsatisfying? Hold my beer.
Okay, here we go. Now let's actually do a ranking, talking these in a little bit more detail. Starting at the bottom, working our way up. And down way at the bottom we have Safe. Safe is the episode where they are delivering the cattle that they picked up in Shindig, which was the episode previous, and basically, it's them in a really backwater town, even by Firefly standards, and the locals take River for a witch and try to burn her. And this episode isn't awful. It's not terrible, but there is literally nothing I like about this episode. Not a single thing. So, like, my relationship with the Western elements of this is I love Western as a flavor. I'm not a big fan of it as a genre. So this episode is the most Western episode of the show there is, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's a big part of why I don't like it, because it's like we're just dealing with this backwater town with these, you know, people who are out of step with modern life, and they're scared by a woman who can do things they can't, and they're gonna burn her for a witch. I'm like, this isn't what I want from my sci-fi series. And like, I get that the outer planets are meant to be the Wild West. I get that. I'm not arguing with that. I'm saying this makes the point too hard. This makes the point so hard that it's boring. And the other stuff that's going on in here, because it's moving forward the Kaylee and Simon relationship, or trying to, and I don't like that either. I'm not going to dwell too much on that in this video, but future videos, I'll be covering that a little bit more. And there's just nothing very fun, very entertaining. There's no great banter. There's no great memorable moment from this. It just kind of is. And there's nothing I like about it. That was number 15, because once I count Serenity the Film, there are 15 things total for me to rank. So next up, number 14, Janestown. Now, before going back and rewatching the series, because I did actually do that for this, I thought this one was going to occupy the bottom spot, because I remembered not liking this one when I first saw it. I didn't remember not liking Safe. It actually turned out I just had scrubbed Safe from my memory altogether. So, there's a lot I don't like about this episode. But unlike Safe, there are also some things that I do like. So those bring it up at least a little bit. So the stuff that I don't love. I don't think this is a particularly great examination of Jane as a character. I don't think there's anything that we learn about him here that we either didn't already learn about him or doesn't get said better in later episodes. I've never been a fan of the misunderstood, the person who leans into the misunderstandings about them, whether they set up the lie that they now have to perpetuate or they stumble into it, but like the person who might get found out and then does. It's a boring story point, and it's something that I don't particularly care for, and it's leaned on rather heavily here. And just the whole narrative just didn't really engage me. Now, I did say there are some things that I like, and there are. And it mainly has to do with the very end of the episode, when Jane, kind of snaps and yells at these people and pushes over the statue, storms away, and he's just back in Serenity going, I don't understand. And, saying that they're just going to put that statue back up, aren't they? And other folks are like, yeah, they probably will. They need to believe in something, even if that something, when they saw it, wasn't what they wanted it to be. And Jane's just said, like, I just can't understand it. And they're like, that's the one moment we get from him that feels like it actually tells us a little something about him, because there's an honesty to that moment. I'm not sure it's enough insight to justify the entire rest of the episode, but that melancholy that sets in for him, this sort of, you almost sense he's having an existential crisis over it. That's nice. It's a good final note. Everything leading up to that final note is iffy at best for me, but had more than Safe going. Number 13, Hearts of Gold. So, this one's a mix. Honestly, the first two that I did are the only ones that I flat out dislike. The next few are going to be ones that are they're just mixed. They are a mixture of things that I do like and things that I'm like, do we have to? So there is stuff that I do like in this episode. There's some great dialogue. There's some great banter between a number of characters. I like how at home Jane is in this brothel, and yet he doesn't come across as skeevy being with these women. He comes across as eager as heck, but he doesn't come across, overly possessive. He doesn't come across as the misogynistic jerk that the villain is. So that's a surprisingly nice balance of elements. The villain getting dispatched is a great moment. I love this mother with her newborn baby just come out. Meet your daddy. Boom. Say goodbye to your daddy. I'm like, yeah. That works. So all that stuff is good. The action's pretty decent. I like them prepping, for when they know the attack's coming. But Inara and Mal, I don't love their relationship in the first place. And their relationship gets really muddied by how much he calls her a whore. Like, I get that part of his animosity, at least in a certain element, has to do with he does have feelings for her, and it's easier to push her away than try and deal with that. I do understand that, but he calls her a whore literally the very first time meeting her, and unless you're going to try and... We see that in a flashback in another episode. So unless you try and tell me that he was in love with her at first sight, that's not at play at the very beginning, and it makes the whole relationship with them really annoying and awkward, and it gets dumber and weirder in this one because Mal sleeps very readily with the woman who runs this brothel, who Inara knows, and then Inara She has initially what I thought was a great reaction to that, which was, you know, I'm surprised she lowered her standards. It's just sex, Mal. What's the problem? I mean, which makes total sense. That's her profession. And then we see her in her shuttle crying. And again, I get the idea. I get the idea she put up a front, but she does have feelings for him, so of course she's hurt. But unfortunately, it feeds in to this, and I don't believe this is intentional, but it feeds into this notion that, oh, you know, that those sex positive, you know, I can do it all on my own, I can take care of myself. Women, in their heart of hearts, they really are just big softies who want a big strong man to take care of them, and they'll get their hearts broken when they, you know, it feels like it's feeding that narrative that at the end of the day, a woman just wants a man. And I know that the show intends it to be much more about the actual connection between these two specifically, but it hasn't been built up well enough for that moment to read the way it's supposed to. And it makes worse a relationship that I was already iffy on. Moving up to number 12, we have Shindig, which does, again, it's a mix of things I like and that I don't like. I kind of like the duel. I kind of like how that pans out and how that goes. I don't particularly care for the Kaylee going to the, the big party and there's basically the mean girls there. Not a huge fan of that. But there are some other interactions that are really nice. Anara gets some nice moments to shine, and also this is one of the better instances of digging into what it is she does and how she operates a little bit better. You know, laying out to this guy who's just been defeated, you know, because he's like, I'll make sure you never work again. And she looks at him and goes, that's not how this works. You are now blacklisted. You'll never be able to be with a licensed companion ever again. So I like how it firmly establishes the nature of the power that she wields in the business that she's in. It's still a little bit at odds because shouldn't this guy have known that? But in terms of getting that information to the audience, it's a pretty decent way to do it. So, again, this one's just kind of a mix of elements that I'm kind of meh on and stuff that's like, oh yeah, that's fun. This is just kind of middling. Next up, we have Trash. Now, this was the second appearance of, I'm going to call her Saffron. She accumulates like 5 names over the course of her 2 appearances. And unfortunately, I really wish they had left her at 1 appearance. That you'll notice we haven't talked about her first appearance yet. But her second appearance is just not as good. Sort of already knowing her deal, already knowing what she's like. She's not nearly as intriguing as realizing she had been playing everybody from the beginning, as opposed to walking in and going, yeah, she's obviously playing everybody. We know this. There is still a fun to watch, ultimately, Mal and his group outsmart her and outwit her. They try and go a little deeper on her in terms of giving some details on her background, giving some possibilities of some things in her past that she would never admit to. But just overall, it's a weaker appearance than her first appearance, and for that, this clocks in here. Number 10, Ariel. This is an episode that, if it had the opportunity to ultimately pay off properly, might have ranked higher. Unfortunately, it drops a number of things that either get addressed in a very hurried fashion later on, like in the movie, or don't get addressed at all. Like the guys with the blue hands, never going to see them again. I mean, if you dig into some of the ancillary material, I think some of the comic books sort of cover a little bit more about what their deal was and what was going on there. But, in terms of the show, in terms of the movie, that's never going to get fully addressed. The stuff that Simon finds out about River and about what happened to her, we get a little bit of resolution on later on down the line, but that feels like it wasn't fully paid off. Jane betraying and trying to turn them in, the way that played in and of itself was good, and the way that when Mal confronts him and gets him out into the, I'm not even sure if it's a proper airlock, it must be a proper airlock, gets him out into the airlock and won't let him in. and is going to kill him. And, Jane asks, what are you going to tell them about why I'm dead? And Mal says, I hadn't thought about it yet. And there's this pause, and Jane says, make something up. Don't tell them what I did. And that's enough for Mal to give him another chance, realizing that he's not even going to bother pleading for his life anymore. He must feel bad because he cares about what these people think of him. And at this point, that is more important to him than living, because he gave up on that already. And it's not a true redemptive moment. Jane is not redeemed in that moment, but it is that, believably, that sliver of humanity that Mal allows him to live. And it was a really fine line to walk, because we've seen Mal kill people for not much. So for him to allow Jane to live after having done this, that was a razor thin line that this show had to walk, and it walked it, and it nailed it. And even the stuff that I complained about, it's not bad. It's just knowing that there's no proper payoff or explanation for a lot of it, not fully, just kind of leaves you going, this is fine. Number 9, Serenity the Film, not the two-parter first episode. It's really annoying that I have to specify that. So rewatching the Serenity film was a very weird experience, because seeing that film in the theater was one of the best movie-going experiences I ever had. I actually saw it at a preview screening in Boston, and some of the cast was there. I think it was Kaylee and Simon. I can't think of the actors' names right now. They were there to introduce the movie. It was a wonderful theater-going experience. However, the times that I've revisited it since then, I keep finding more and more things that annoy me. First off, I mentioned how in Safe it was almost all Western with no sci-fi. Serenity, the film, swings it almost entirely in the opposite direction. After we get the one sort of heist in the beginning, it's almost all sci-fi with no Western. And while, like I said, I'm not big on Westerns, and if you were asking me just straight genres, I would watch a sci-fi movie before I would watch a Western. It was the blending of those two that I liked. So the fact that this doesn't come across like sci-fi Western, but instead sci-fi with cowboy-style characters in it, it loses some of the flavor of the show, which I otherwise really love. I've got mixed feelings about the operative. I love Chiwetel Ejiofor in the part. It's actually the first thing I ever saw him in, and he's really, really good in it. But I'm actually going to end up doing a separate video about my problems with him. So that'll be a little bit down the line, so I won't dwell on that. But he is very good in the part, and the resolution of certain things works well enough. I don't like the Reavers being explained. I think they are way scarier when we didn't know where they came from. And now that we know, they were just created by this, and now we know what they are. Like the idea that the only explanation, we have no idea what the Reavers are. I mean, we know they're people, so it's not like they're aliens. But the fact that the only possibility that anyone could think of was they saw the edge of space and just went mad, and no one can be sure whether or not that's even what happened. That worked. That was terrifying. And especially with some of the stuff we saw in episodes I have yet to get to on this list, that really did work for me. And so getting an actual explanation is like, oh, well, this isn't nearly as enticing to me. I don't think explaining the Reavers makes them more interesting or makes them scarier or more compelling or really anything more than they were before we had them explained. And I'm also not sure the timeline makes any sense, because the way this movie lays it out, they only would have been around for, 15, 20 years tops. And it seems weird that the Reavers have been around for probably about as long as Simon's been alive. It feels like they should have been around longer than that. I don't know. But so there's a mix of things. But, for the complaints I just had, and wash. But there is a lot of great stuff. There's fantastic dialogue. There's awesome action scenes in this. There's some really good character moments. I love Book and Mal talking about by the fire. There's some terrific action scenes. I really do love River's action scenes. Like, just does the ballet of death is what it is in my head. And I love that, and that's great. So there's a lot of really good stuff in this movie, but there's also a fair amount of stuff that really irks me, so I can't go higher than this. Number 8, Our Mrs. Reynolds. The first time that we saw Saffron, and yeah, she works a lot better here. She is, I think, such a great character here in terms of when the turn comes and you realize that she was not what she was pretending to be at all, and just sort of watching her play character after character after character. First she gets Mal, then she tries for Wash and it doesn't work, she just knocks him out. And my favorite though is her trying to put the mojo, the whammy onto Inara, and Inara figuring, going along, and then just, something happens, like an alarm goes off or something, and she just looks at her and goes, "You're good. Yes, so are you. Who are you? Where'd you learn that?" Like that. Oh, I love that. It's so good. And she's just fun. Like, there were a number of villains or obstacle characters. She's the most fun by far in my mind, at least in this appearance. And this is just a great little kind of con artist-y kind of story. And I really enjoy it. Number 7, War Stories. So this is where Mal and Wash get abducted by Niska and tortured. It does a real good job of showing the strength of the bond between some of these characters. The bond between Wash and Mal. The bond between Mal and Zoe. The bond between Wash and Zoe. I mean, it's best summed up, I think, by, Zoe talking with Niska and him, doing this big build-up, and he's going to go, like, you can only pick one of them. And she doesn't even wait for him to finish. She just points at Washington and says, him. I mean, that's it. That's perfect. And, then going in the rescue, and the rescue is really cool. And River has an awesome moment where she, looks out and just sees the guys there, and she just picks up a gun, doesn't even look, boom, boom. And she doesn't even seem to realize what it was she did, and that's one of the better sort of seeds planted about what she's capable of, and I love that a lot. That really works moving forward, and there's some, like you often get in the show, there's some great lines, like you've got Book, gearing up, and so doesn't the good book have a few things to say about the subject of murder? And he says, yes, very specific things. It is, however, much more vague on the subject of kneecaps. I'm like, oh, I love this guy. And it's intense when it needs to be intense. It's an exciting rescue, and when it gets to that point, it is properly emotional between Zoe and Wash, and then it's funny towards the end when Mal very awkwardly, jokingly tries to pay off, having said to Wash while they were being tortured, well, I think I need to sleep with your wife, because there's obviously tension that needs to be released. So all that and some laughs. Good stuff. Number 6, The Message. So this one is the one where Zoe and Mal's old war buddy shows up. They think he's dead. He's not. He's actually a mule. And how that all plays out. And that one does a good job of relaying the lingering damage that the war had on just the people who were there. And that means Mal, that means Zoe, that means their friend. And it does it in a way that isn't like beating PTSD over your head. But at the end of the day, in some ways, they didn't die in the war, but in some ways, they didn't really survive. Not as the people that they were before it ended. And this episode does a pretty good job of illustrating that, while at the same time keeping things moving along with kind of a chase hunt story. And the guy, I don't know the actor's name. He appeared on Angel too, and actually he was in Buffy. He was one of the trifecta actors. He appeared in all 3, and And he was good in all three, and he always, in all three appearances, he did that kind of, you're drawn to him and you like him, but you're like, you're not good, like not in a fun Spike way, but in a, you're just damaged, aren't you? And in some cases of some of his appearances in Whedon's other shows, that sort of played out a little bit later, but he was real good for that vibe, and he was real good for this part. And I think, like I said, it just shows that lingering damage. And even as you're bonding with the people who are there with you, it brings out the bad of what it was you lived through. Number 5, Objects in Space. Last episode of the show before it was canceled. Well, it had already been canceled before this thing didn't even air initially. But last episode of the show before we got the movie. So this one is Jubal Early. And I described in my 10 words segment that he was the rough draft of the operative. And I feel like he was in some ways this slightly unusual guy who's really capable at what he does. They do kind of go about their things very different. But I like Early as a character, and I feel like that there might have been like a few things that could have been handled a little bit better. Like I think they kind of tipped their hand to how unpleasant he was a little too early. Like when out of nowhere he says to Kaylee, "Have you ever been raped?" Which is really uncomfortable. And it's probably supposed to be. Don't get me wrong, but I think it might have played even a little better if we didn't really start to see that nastiness come out until he was getting more frustrated and not being able to find River, and River starts tormenting him over the speakers. But that little nitpick aside, he's a fascinating character. He's really well played. He's just weird. He's just a weird guy who says weird things, but at the same time is so good at what he does that it's a really funky balance. So he's interesting. What River does to deal with this guy is interesting. It just plays really well for something that has a ton of focus on a villain who had not appeared before. So he's not a recurring villain. He's a one-timer. This had a really interesting focal point, and it makes for a fascinating episode that also feels like a good, solid send-off for the show in a lot of ways, because it feels like we get our little moments with each one of these characters as they try and deal with just the stuff they keep running into or keeps finding them. Number 4, the train job. So after the much longer Serenity pilot episode was presented to Fox, they basically said, yeah, can you do the same thing in half the time? And thus the train job, which does reiterate a lot of the same points that first story did, but does it at a much faster pace, and it's a lot of fun. Like, I like the slower moments of Firefly. I like the more contemplative moments, but this is a rip-roaring fun episode, and that's no bad thing. I enjoy that a lot, and I love the end where with Niska's henchman, Mal's trying to give him the money back, say, look, tell Niska we couldn't do it and everything's square, and the guy's, stands up, he's like, I will hunt you down, and he's like, oh, is this guy gonna be a recurring villain? Mal's just like, and kicks him, and he gets sucked into the intake of Serenity, and like, oh, I guess he's not going to be recurring. Again, just making the point about Mal's, like, if you are in his way and you're not going to move, he will move you. And by move you, I mean kill you. So, like that, that ending moment about all the stuff prior to that was really cool and really fun, because we get, their nature as criminals, what they're willing to do. They're always willing to steal from the Alliance, but when they realize who this is actually hurting, they're like, crap, we don't have it in our hearts to actually do this, because we make our living as criminals, but we're not bad people. Most of them aren't, at any rate. And so, all that information that was in the much longer actual first episode of the show does all appear in here just in a more compressed timeline, and being more compressed and more condensed into shorter time doesn't actually sacrifice all that much. It's pretty impressive. Number 3, out of gas. I wasn't kidding when I did the 10 word segment on this. Watching this is really tense, and despite the fact that, like, you should know, there's no way Mal doesn't live through this, it really does feel like, oh my God, we're gonna watch him die. It ratchets it up by steps as it goes along really, really well, and just the things that keep going wrong, and just the slow, oh my God, what is next? What now? And as he's sending everyone off, and we get the flashbacks, and we get our first looks at these various people and how they found their way onto the ship, the ones who we didn't already see their first appearance. So we get to find out how Kaylee got there, how Wash got there, Inara's first encounter with Mal, which I don't love. I mentioned it already. But that's kind of really my only sticking point with this episode. And then Jane basically just buying the guy who was paid to track you down because you made him a better offer. Like, yeah, that's Jane. Makes total sense. And intermingling what was by and large, enjoyable, light, like, oh, good memories of how all these people came onto the ship with the ship is dead in space and the captain is dying. The juxtaposition of that works really, really well, and the points at which it cuts from one to the other all work terrifically. It's just a really well-balanced episode for what it's trying to do. Everything just feeds into the different elements and just makes it great. Number 2, Bushwhacked. Funny thing, I did a preliminary list of rankings of episodes based off my memory before I went back in and rewatched these, and I figured I would rewatch the first few to make sure it was what I remembered. Now, Bushwhacked is fairly early. I think it's actually the 3rd episode, and I had that fairly low on my preliminary list, and then I watched it and I'm like, why did I have this so low? This is great! Which made me then watch the entire rest of the thing, like, because obviously my memory is not what it should be in terms of all this. So, man. So this is the episode where they pick up a survivor of a Reaver attack. He saw the worst that humanity could possibly be, and it broke him. And the fear that these people have of what it was that he encountered, what it was that he is now trying to emulate, and the tension, the way it's shot, the pacing of it. It is unnerving. It is disquieting. It feels like something out of the Alien franchise, but it doesn't involve creature. It doesn't involve the unknown. It doesn't involve, an alien monster. It's just a man who saw and survived things that no one should see, and if they do see them, they should not survive it. And what happens to him, to people put into that situation, and just the way everything is built up and designed in terms of like laying out the mythology of the Reavers, like what the stories that people who live in fear of them tell each other, to try and understand what the heck this could possibly be. I really, really like this episode. But if you've been paying attention, and I've been doing good old-fashioned process of elimination, then you know that my number 1 episode of Firefly is Serenity, the 2-part pilot. First episode of this show, I was sold. I loved it. I love the opening, like with a big thrilling yeehaw, let's go fight, keep the troops, upbeat opening that then goes to such melancholy as this slow music kicks in, and this kid that seconds ago Mal had been reassuring that they were going to live because they are too young and too pretty to die. and this kid standing next to him just gets gunned down, and Mal, you don't know if he doesn't notice or if he didn't see or if he can't process it because he's just staring out at defeat of a cause he believed in. And so from that opening, you immediately get, both that Mal did not used to be this jaded, but also why he is in a way that is much better than any, full flashback episode or extended story of him telling people stuff around the dinner table. This opening communicates that so well, and then we get every character gets such a great introduction because we've got Zoe's part of that initial thing, but then we've got Wash with his dinosaurs. Curse your inevitable betrayal. God. And oh man, I love Wash so much, and Kaylee, so in love with the ship and talking to it and getting real upset if anyone badmouths it. And, Simon being all cagey, River just being out of it, Jane, with these great lines like, when he says to Mal, I didn't portray it because the money wasn't good enough. And Mal says, what about when it is? And Jane goes, well, that'll be a very interesting day. And getting a sense on their dynamic. We got Badger, and I like Badger a lot. He's a lot of fun. The time with which this is able to take things, because it is a two-parter. It's a double-length episode. I love the introductions of all these characters. I love the feel of it. I love the music in it. I feel like this tells you what this show is more than any other single episode does. And the fact that it is able to be the pilot, be the episode that has to establish everything, that has to establish these people, this world, this situation, all of it, but does it in a way that doesn't feel perfunctory, doesn't feel like a yeah, can you establish it so we can actually get to a good story. It's the whole package, as far as I'm concerned. And to me, that makes it the best episode of Firefly that was ever made. So those are my thoughts. That's my list. That's my ranking, plus your little stuff down up at the front with the 10-word stuff. Hope you had fun. What are your thoughts on Firefly? How would you rank it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's all the stuff to do, such as like and subscribe. Support me on Patreon if you like my stuff. Links for all that stuff and more down in the description. So until next time, this council is adjourned.